All right, so let's dive right into this the Signalgate thing you sent over.
Yeah.
It sounds like something out of a, like a political thriller novel,
Right.
but it's actually happening right now.
Yeah.
And we've got your article from The Atlantic here, and it's a pretty in-depth report on this whole unfolding situation.
It is.
So our mission here is, I guess, to really cut through the noise and try to understand what exactly Signalgate is, why it's causing such a stir, and what the implications might be for, for anyone really, even if they aren't, glued to the U.S. political news every minute.
Yeah, and I think what's really fascinating here is how a seemingly small digital slip-up can escalate so quickly into a huge event
Yeah.
with potential, national security ramifications and, of course, political fallout as well.
Right, right.
It really highlights how complex communication is in this digital age, especially in those really high-stakes environments.
Absolutely. At its core, Signalgate is about this group chat
Mm-hmm.
on the Signal app involving a bunch of key figures from the Trump administration's second term, right?
Second term.
And they were discussing military strikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen. And it's become a scandal because of how this information came to light
Yeah.
and what was actually being shared in that chat.
And it's important to remember that this military action was one of the first major foreign policy moves of this new Trump administration
Right.
since they took office in January 2025.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anytime there's a new administration and they make these big initial moves, it's always going to be under intense scrutiny.
Of course. Of course. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief over at The Atlantic,
Mm-hmm.
he was accidentally added to this chat.
Wow.
And he ended up publishing an article with this very attention-grabbing title, "The Trump Administration Accidentally Texted Me Its War Plans."
Oh, my goodness.
So that title alone kind of tells you something about the potential gravity of this whole situation.
Yeah, it definitely raises some serious questions.
Uh,
When you think about it, a journalist accidentally gets included in this private discussion about some pretty sensitive military operations.
Right.
You have to ask about the security protocols.
Right.
What kind of oversight is in place.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into the specifics. Who was actually in this chat? What was said? And what were the immediate reactions and official responses to all of this?
Okay.
We also need to look at why this has blown up into such a big controversy.
Right.
Touching on the security aspects, the idea of competence, potential legal issues, and the impact this could all have on international trust. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a really clear picture of what Signalgate is and why it's been all over the headlines. But first, let's just lay out how this whole thing actually unfolded.
All right. Sounds good. So the timeline is important here to understand the sequence of events. The chat activity about these strikes happened between March 11th and 15th of 2025. The strikes themselves were carried out on March 15th. And Goldberg's article didn't come out until March 24th. So that delay suggests he took some time to really think about and verify what he had seen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the group chat itself had a pretty casual name, right? Houthi PC Small Group.
Right.
But don't let that fool you. It included some really high-ranking people in the administration.
Yeah.
We're talking Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe. And there may have been even more, up to 18 members total.
Wow, that's a lot of key decision makers.
Yeah.
In what seems to be a real-time discussion about these ongoing military operations,
Right.
it really highlights the need for secure and controlled communication in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it seems Jeffrey Goldberg was added to the chat by mistake, a simple error by Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor. And it makes you wonder, what are the processes for setting up and managing these group chats, especially when they're dealing with such sensitive topics?
Yeah, for sure. Like, how easy is it to accidentally add someone who shouldn't be there to a conversation about imminent military action?
Right.
What safeguards are in place to prevent that?
Exactly. But it's the specifics of what was shared that are really the big deal here.
Okay.
According to Goldberg's article and the full chat log that came out later, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared some really specific details before the strikes even happened, like precise launch times for F-18 jets.
Wow.
He even used language like, quote, trigger-based F-18, first strike window starts at 13:45.
Wow, so specific.
Yeah. Then there were details about a second strike package, more F-18s launching at 14:10. He mentioned MQ-9 drones and Tomahawk missiles and even talked about the intended targets and the whole schedule of the operation.
That level of detail before a strike is pretty alarming from a security perspective.
Oh.
If that kind of information got to the wrong hands, either accidentally or through a security breach, it could have been disastrous for the mission and the safety of everyone involved.
Yeah.
It's no wonder security experts were reportedly stunned by what they saw in the chat.
Yeah, I bet. So the situation gets even more intense when you look at what happened after the strikes.
Okay.
Goldberg confirmed on social media at around 1:55 p.m. Eastern Time that Sana had been hit, and shortly after that, members of the chat started exchanging messages congratulating each other.
Wow.
Waltz even mentioned a key Houthi missile figure who was apparently killed in the rubble, and Hegseth confirmed that more strikes were happening, all this, while Goldberg was still in the chat just observing.
It's kind of crazy to imagine him just sitting there watching all this unfold.
Right, and then eventually he removed himself.
Yeah, that's wild. So what happened next?
Well, once this became public knowledge, there were, of course, immediate reactions and official statements.
Right.
So let's start with the White House response.
Okay, so the official line from the NSC spokesperson, Brian Hughes, was basically an attempt to downplay the whole thing.
Okay.
They confirmed the chat was real, but insisted it only contained unclassified updates about a mission that had already been pre-approved.
Okay.
They specifically denied that it had any classified data or formal war plans.
Right, right. And then Trump, being Trump, he had to weigh in, right?
Of course.
He called Goldberg a sleazebag
Oh, boy.
and dismissed The Atlantic as unreliable, even bringing up a past report from 2020 that had been critical of him. He also said he had no knowledge of the Signal chat.
That's interesting because if you think about it, his claim of not knowing about the chat doesn't really square with the fact that so many high-ranking officials in his administration were actively participating in it.
Yeah, good point. Then just a day after the story broke, there was a Senate Intelligence Committee session on March 25th, and both National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard and CIO Director John Ratcliffe defended the administration's actions. They basically echoed the White House's initial statement saying no classified secrets were compromised through the chat.
So it seems like they were trying to control the narrative and downplay the potential damage, but how long could that really last?
Yeah, well, not long, because on March 26th, The Atlantic published the full transcript of the Signal chat log.
Oh, wow.
And this is where things got even more complicated, because that detailed pre-strike info shared by Secretary Hegseth was reportedly confirmed as classified by 3 independent sources,
Oh, wow.
including at least one defense official with direct knowledge.
So that kind of blew their earlier denials out of the water, right?
Exactly. And then the Pentagon spokesperson, Sean Parnell, he tried to defend Hegseth by saying he was just keeping the team updated about an imminent operation, not actually leaking classified info in a way that would jeopardize security.
But that seems like a pretty thin argument, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, many experts would say that sharing those specific operational details,
Right.
like timelines and methods, on a platform that's not approved before an attack, that inherently increases the risk of that information being exploited by adversaries.
Yeah, regardless of its initial classification.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the timeline, the key players, the initial reactions. Now let's really dig into the core elements of this Signalgate controversy and why people are so worried. What do you think is the biggest concern here?
Well, as we've discussed, the level of detail in those chat messages is a huge red flag. Hegseth talking about launch windows, the types of aircraft, the possible targets. It's all incredibly sensitive.
Yeah.
If someone hostile had gotten into that chat even before Goldberg was added, it could have compromised the entire operation and put U.S. military personnel at risk. So the fact that experts were stunned by this really highlights the potential danger here.
And then there's the Signal app itself. It's known for its encryption, and a lot of people who are concerned about privacy use it.
Right.
But it's not officially approved for classified communications within the U.S. government. And you mentioned an NSA alert about potential hacking risks on Signal, so that only makes things worse.
Yeah, that's right. While Signal does have end-to-end encryption, which is great for protecting messages while they're being sent, the app itself hasn't gone through those really rigorous security checks and controls that are required for handling classified government information.
Right.
So choosing to use it for discussions about military operations raises serious questions about whether the administration understands and follows proper security protocols.
Absolutely. And then there's the auto-delete feature on Signal. It erases messages after a certain amount of time, apparently 1 or 4 weeks in this case.
Oh, wow.
And that goes against the Presidential Records Act, which says official government communications have to be preserved.
Yeah, that's a big problem because it means there's a chance that records of important government actions could be lost forever.
Right.
And those records are crucial for accountability, for legal reasons, and just for transparency.
Yeah. For sure. And then you can't really ignore the hypocrisy here. Trump, Hegseth, Stephen Miller, these guys have been incredibly critical of Hillary Clinton's use of her private email server when she was Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
They were all about the security risks.
Right.
But now they seem to be relying on a platform that's not secure for really sensitive discussions.
Yeah, that's not going to go unnoticed.
Definitely not. And then there are the international implications. The fact that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, was meeting with Putin in Moscow around the same time as the Signal chat is raising concerns about possible foreign compromise.
Right.
And there's the question of whether allies will continue to share intelligence with an administration that seems careless about its own sensitive information.
Exactly.
We've seen before, like with the Snowden leaks, how a lack of security can make allies hesitate to share info.
Yeah, trust is really the foundation of intelligence sharing between countries.
Right.
And if allies start to think the U.S. can't be trusted to protect their secrets, they're going to be less willing to share.
For sure. So it's no wonder the Signalgate thing has blown up into such a major controversy. But let's dig a little deeper. What are the broader implications here?
Oh.
Like you mentioned, security is the primary worry. Mara Karlin, a former Pentagon official, called the leak jaw-dropping and abnormal.
Yeah.
She emphasized that those operational details should be kept in secure environments, not on some regular messaging app.
Right.
And Senator Jim Himes said, "We're lucky no pilots died."
Wow.
So that really shows how serious this could have been.
It does. And beyond the immediate security risks, there's this whole issue of competence.
Right.
Accidentally adding a journalist to a chat about military strikes makes the administration look amateurish and careless.
For sure.
Hakeem Jeffries called the situation reckless, irresponsible, and dangerous.
Yeah.
And even Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski said, this is what you get with no organization.
Wow. So even within the GOP, there's concern.
It seems like it. And then you've got the political double standard, which, as we said, is causing a lot of outrage.
Mm.
These guys were so critical of past administrations for communication security issues.
Right.
But now they seem to be doing something similar, if not worse.
Yeah. Senator Adam Schiff called it glaring hypocrisy. And Representative Don Beyer said someone's got to pay.
Mm.
So there's definitely a sense that this is being treated differently because of political affiliations.
It seems that way. And of course, there are the legal implications, too. Legal experts are looking into whether using Signal this way and sharing those pre-strike details might have actually broken the law.
Okay.
The Espionage Act, which deals with mishandling classified information, could come into play if what Hegseth shared is found to have been classified. And then there's the Federal Records Act, which requires government communications to be archived properly that might have been violated because of the auto-delete feature.
Right.
And there's actually a lawsuit that's been filed by the organization American Oversight.
Oh, wow.
To try to force the preservation of those Signal chat logs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this whole thing has also damaged trust both within the U.S. and internationally.
Yeah.
Former officials like Don Bacon have warned that adversaries like Russia and China are probably monitoring these unsecure channels.
Of course they are.
And even people outside of politics like Dave Portnoy have expressed concern and called for accountability.
It seems like this has really struck a nerve with a lot of people.
It has, and as you'd expect, it's also highlighted the partisan divide in U.S. politics. Democrats are calling for investigations and even resignations.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Schumer wants a thorough inquiry, but many Republicans are downplaying the issue.
Right.
House Speaker Mike Johnson has been talking about unity, but there are some Republicans like Senator Roger Wicker who are also asking for answers.
So it's not completely falling along party lines.
Not entirely. So where do things stand now?
Well, as of March 27th, Signalgate is still dominating the news, and there's pressure on Congress to get the full chat logs and hold people accountable. The Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees are going to be investigating.
Okay.
But those committees are controlled by Republicans.
Yeah.
So that can influence what they find.
Right. And there's also talk that this could end up defining Trump's second term.
Yeah.
It could hurt his support and even cause division within his administration.
Mm-hmm.
There are reports that Vice President Vance wasn't fully on board with the Yemen strikes.
I'll see.
So that suggests there might be some internal tension brewing.
Yeah, an event like this so early in a term can really set the tone and make people question things, even those who were strong supporters.
Yeah.
If the administration is seen as disorganized or reckless, it can erode public trust and undermine their agenda.
And it's brought back these big debates about government transparency, the
Yeah.
need for secure communication and military ethics, especially with reports that 53 people may have died in the strikes.
Yeah, the human cost of any military action always requires careful consideration. And any mistakes, especially those made worse by communication lapses, just amplify the need for accountability.
For sure. And ultimately, this whole thing seems to be hurting the image of strength and competence that the administration has tried to project.
Yeah, instead of looking strong and efficient, they now look careless and maybe even reckless.
Exactly. So, what does all of this mean for our listeners?
Well,
I think Signalgate, while it's focused on this one incident in the US government, really shows how important secure communication is,
hmm,
especially when it comes to national security.
right.
And it highlights how complex things are in this digital age where a small mistake, like accidentally adding someone to a group chat, can trigger a huge crisis.
Yeah, if we take a step back, it reminds us that our digital communications are vulnerable and we need strong security measures,
Right.
especially when we're sharing sensitive information no matter what the situation is.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting to think about the fact that these discussions about military operations might have happened on an app with security flaws, and an auto-delete feature raises questions about how governments operate in this digital world and how they keep records.
Yeah.
It also makes you realize how important a free press is in uncovering these things and the public's right to know what's going on, especially when it comes to national security.
Absolutely.
So Signalgate is more than just a news story. It's a case study in how small digital errors can have huge consequences.
And it makes you wonder, if something like this can happen at the highest levels of government, what does that say about the security of information in other organizations and even in our own personal lives?
Right. It's a reminder that we need to be careful about what we share and how we communicate in this increasingly interconnected world.
Absolutely.
So that's our deep dive into Signalgate, a situation full of contradictions, potential risks, and political fallout.
It really is.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant, understand security protocols, and communicate carefully in this digital age.
Yeah, well said.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in.
See you next time.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.